Good morning. What we have today is a split crew so that we can talk a little bit about emergency management. I think I've alluded to this before, that the whole goal of this seminar, if you will, is to give you guys an idea of what to expect if we get the big one, right? That's not the time to be learning how to handle an emergency. So certainly there will be a lot of things that we'll have to do on the fly, right? But if you kind of have in your mind the basic structure, then I think things will go a lot smoother. Now I know that we've got, firefighters and some emergency management people from other towns, so please bear with us, and we'd certainly like your input if there's something that we've forgotten or something that you think is important. So what we have today is we've got a couple folks from Hennepin County Emergency Management. Got Dan Bovitz, Eric Wage, and I think everybody knows Jim Flanders from the fire department, who handles the emergency management items for those folks. So those are kind of the speakers today. If anybody doesn't know, the restroom is right across the way. Feel free to get up and use that anytime you like. What we have planned today is I'm going to do a little bit of introduction and some responsibilities that Public Works has. Eric's going to talk about emergency disaster definitions, as well as the emergency management cycle, incident command, incident management, and then Dan's going to take over and talk about incident management systems. We'll take a little break. Eric and Dan will come back and talk about debris management. Jim will talk about the ICS, Incident Command System Overview. And please, when people talk about or say acronyms, if you don't know, raise your hand, because it makes it all a lot easier if you know what we're talking about. I'll talk a little bit about the 1998 tornado in St. Peter that we responded to and help those folks out. Little of the lessons that we learned from that. Jim will talk about our Armor radio system. You guys know quite a bit about it right now, but he'll talk a little bit more about the two-way radio system. We'll do a little bit of an exercise to get people thinking about how to handle an emergency. And then we've got, Jim will talk about hot wash, family considerations, emotional responses to disasters, disaster hazards and risks, mutual aid, and other FEMA training. Now at the end of this, and sometime later this year, we'll all do the incident ICS 100 training online. And so I think you've picked up some of the sheets that tell you how to get into the computer system. We'll talk about that later, but that'll kind of finish up, and then everybody will be in the eyes of FEMA, kind of registered, if you will. So with that, when an emergency happens, certainly from a family perspective, city perspective, those are kind of things that are in cahoots with one another. If you've got family problems at home, you've got disaster, damage, so forth, you got to deal with that, right? Because you can't come here and work when you got that in the back of your mind. So know, number one, that if you've got problems at home, deal with it, okay? When and if you get ready to go to work, if for whatever reason, communication breaks down, come on in. because that will happen. Usually we see that in some emergencies where communication systems break down, you can't communicate with one another. So the thing we want to leave you with is, if you're okay, your family's okay, your property's okay, and we can't get a hold of you or we haven't got a hold of you, come in. We'll deal with it at that point, okay? The one thing that you might see when you're out on an emergency is people asking you for this, that, can you help me this, can you do this? I think the one thing that we want to impress upon you is, don't freelance. If you are responsible to me for something, then communicate with me. Don't go off and freelance and do stuff on your own, because then all of a sudden the system breaks down. If that person is very persistent, tell them to go see me or Flanders or police or somebody, but we have to keep our incident command system structure in place so that we can get the work done. Usually what will happen is, first of all, we'll have damage assessment. You know, what's the state of the city? Usually it's dark, can't see very well. We will likely have mutual aid from other cities if we request it. Likely what we would do is we would put that person from another city with one of you folks, because you kind of know the town, how it lays out and so forth, so that if you go down the street, can't get through, you know, you note that damage, come out, go around. And so one of the primary things we want to accomplish in the beginning is to find out what we have in Minnetonka. You know, what areas of town are bad? Is the whole town bad? Do we have electricity out in certain parts of town? Do we have utility systems down in certain parts of town? And so we need to get that information transferred so we kind of know what the total picture is, okay? So keep that in the back of your mind. Don't freelance. Keep reporting to the person that you're responsible to. We talked about the ICS 100 training. We'll do that later. It's a computer training. And the thing I want to say about that now is that we're going to give you the information so that you can go in and answer those questions online. So you should hear it twice. Going on the computer should be just a matter of going in and filling in the answers. Now, the feds get kind of tricky with the way they phrase questions, so you got to be careful about that. Another thing we want to emphasize this morning is keep yourself safe. It does absolutely no good if you're out there trying to help and you get hurt, then you can't do your job, right? So keep yourself safe, keep an eye on your partner, keep an eye on the other employees. If you see something that's going to wind up hurting them, remind them. Remind them nicely. We don't want to see anybody hurt. First responders, Public Works is a first responder. Not in the sense that maybe police and fire are, but we are considered first responders. Now with Public Works, usually what happens is we're kind of the last to leave. So the police and fire take care of their stuff and they go off and do whatever they do. We're in there for the long haul. And that's what we saw in St. Peter. We were there for the long haul, helping with debris management, getting the streets cleared, doing whatever those folks wanted us to do. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. Like I said, make sure your family, your house, your property, yourself is taken care of firstly. And if we haven't talked to you, come on in. We'll deal with it at the time. So with that, we'll proceed down the agenda. And so from here, Eric is going to talk about disaster definitions, the emergency management cycle, and the incident command system. So feel free to ask questions.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Brian. Congratulations to Minnetonka for doing this kind of training in advance. I've ended up going all over the country for different types of disasters and assisting, and there's a clear difference between the cities and the counties that prepare for this kind of stuff in advance and the ones that just go about their day until something happens. And those are the ones that we have the most difficulty with, and those are the ones that have the residents that have the biggest problems. Sometimes disasters are just so big they're going to be catastrophic one way or the other, but there's definite advantages to thinking about it, talking about it, having some training, maybe some exercises beforehand. So huge advantage. So again, congratulations on that. Good work. So we're going to just talk about some definitions in the emergency world and the disaster world. And that's really important. That's important because up until, I don't know, probably 20 years ago, every discipline had their own lingo for everything. And so you'd talk to cops and law enforcement, and they would have their own language. You'd talk to fire, and they'd have their own, and public works would have their own, and public health would have their own. And all those folks need to come together during a disaster and work together. And they're thrown into situations where these different disciplines need to come together. And then there's also the phenomenon of no matter what happens, if you have a presidential declaration that's impacted your community, you're going to get people coming in from different states. They'll be coming in, and so this last fall, for example, I was down in Monroe County, which is where the Florida Keys are in Florida, because Irma hit. And I could count on maybe two hands the number of actual Monroe County people in that EOC. And everybody else, and there were hundreds, were from other jurisdictions in Florida and other jurisdictions in the United States. So a lot of different accents will be running around. And the way we get everybody in the same sheet of music is to be speaking the same language, using the same terms, so we don't invent different names for things, and we don't come up with unique job descriptions. There's no onboarding time in an emergency. So the people that you come in to help you, they need to take a look at your plan and go, okay, I know exactly what they're trying to do here. You know, you can't have big, long training sessions for them and try to tell everybody how it's done in Minnetonka. That won't work. So we do things in a standard way. So it's really important to understand the definitions and the language. Then I'll talk about the emergency management cycle. Emergency management never really stops. There's a cycle for everything, and it's how you mitigate and lessen the impact of disasters. It's how you prepare and exercise and train. It's how you respond, and then finally it's how you recover. And recovery is one of the longest types of activities that we do. And you would have more involvement in the recovery than most other agencies. A lot of the red lights and siren departments, they'll be gone, and you'll still be there trying to put things back together. So you should be interested in all things. You should be interested in that aspect. We'll talk about incident command versus incident management, and I know, like Jim and I think maybe Dan will get into that more in detail, and then I'll step down and come back a little bit later for debris management, which is an important thing. So I know you can't read this. Unless you want, you could cover your left eye and see if you could read the top line for me. But so it is kind of an eye chart. But I'm going to use this to prompt my memory to, wow, it's all memorized. I don't need to do that. I should have made handouts for you, but I'll get them to you guys, and you can have them. But there's a spectrum of emergency management out there. And again, it occurs continuously, different aspects of this. But you can see it's broken down into there's three big north-south lines that go through that chart. The one on the left is kind of routine operations. That's kind of your everyday stuff. The one in the middle is your crisis operations. That's what's going on when you do have a little bit more significant to a lot more specific emergencies. And then the stuff on the right is recovery. So how we define that is steady state is what's going on all the time. That's just your daily stuff that you do. You show up at work, you do your thing, and it's steady state. And then there's things called unusual events. Unusual events are the incidents or whatever the events that come about in your day, and you have them all the time, that you can fix with your own resources. Those are the things that You know, you have the different utilities that you run, the water, all kind of stuff, or you have some of the street maintenance and stuff. Things that happen nearly every day. They're unusual, but you know, you go out and fix them, and you don't have to call up help to do that. You just call up somebody else in your department. They come over with the sod truck. They take care of the tree that's fallen down into the road. That's not a big deal. So that's not in the emergency management scope. If you can fix it with the stuff that you have, or the normal things that you do, the normal people that you call up, the regular vendors that you use, that's just every day, right, as far as we're concerned. When it starts to get into our realm where we become interested is things like incidents, emergencies, disasters, and catastrophic disasters. And that's a ascending scale. It goes upward in intensity and pucker factor. That first one is incidents. And what makes an incident different than the unusual event is it might last longer and it requires some planning. So you might need to sit down in a room and go, okay, how are we going to tackle this one? And so you put together a actual sort of plan. It could be a bar napkin plan or planned over the hood of your car, but it's still a plan that's a little bit separate from just, you know, running out there and fixing it. That's your first stage of crisis or whatever. And it's not a big one, right? And again, we're probably not going to get involved in emergency management. We're just going to be interested in kind of how that goes. Because sometimes if things go south, then it becomes a bigger deal. But most of the time, they're fixed and they're on their way. But it's the first step in using a plan. And that's important because we encourage people for a planned event like a festival or something like that to use the incident command system, which you're going to hear about a little bit later. The next one, an emergency, is definitely where we get interested. That's when the resources that you have are now exceeded. You know, you don't have enough stuff, and you got to invoke some kind of like a mutual aid or even something, just an unusual call like, hey, you know, we're just getting overwhelmed here. Our butts are getting kicked. We need to get some more stuff. So an emergency is where we start to really get engaged because now you're ordering resources up, right? There's, on the top, you can see different declarations. At this point, you may be so exceeded as a city that you're going to go to the mayor and say, we might need an emergency declaration. And an emergency declaration is something that activates all kinds of powers that aren't normally out there. So normally, in order to get resources and to, you know, there's a special way to do it, and you might need to bid on things, and you know, it goes out for bid and comes back and all that kind of stuff. When you have an emergency, you don't have time for all those kind of procedures, okay, because people need help. So if you get a declaration from your mayor of an emergency, for 3 days, you can go through and basically get the resources you need without the normal mumbo jumbo of bureaucratic procedures and all that kind of stuff. So emergency powers are really important. And your emergency manager officials and your chiefs and stuff, fire chiefs and everything, are gonna make a recommendation as to when they think it's time to go for a declaration. The mayor on their own can get 3 days. And then if they want to extend it out to 30, then they've got to convene the council, the city council, and they got to say, yeah, we're going to extend this, okay, because it's that big. And then the council can extend it in 30-day increments. The city's the first layer to do that. Sometimes cities will have a declaration, and the county, oh, whoa, sorry, wake up, everybody. The county won't, right, because our threshold for action is bigger, you know, because we're a bigger entity, right? But the county board chair can do the same thing. And that's an important recommendation because if it's big enough to go even higher, each one of those lower levels really needs to have declared. So if we're going to go to the governor and eventually to the president to get a disaster declaration, we need to make sure that the city and counties have declared too, because we have to show that we've exceeded our resources. So that's really, really an important facet of what we do, right? So that's how that whole declaration process works. And it's important to get declarations because not only do you get powers, but once you get to the state and the federal level, you get money. And I guarantee you that everybody in your government is going to be interested in getting that money to help with recovery and response costs. So if you make it to a presidential declaration, you get 75% of eligible costs covered. And then because we're in Minnesota, the state picks up the remaining 25% of eligible costs. So do you think they'll be interested in that at the city level? Absolutely, they will, right? Because they get that reimbursement. If we don't make it up into a presidential level declaration, and it's all based on the amount of damage per person, then you go for a state declaration, and the state pays 75%, and the city, the county, and the cities pay the rest, the remaining 25%. So there's some important thresholds there. Okay. Then you get into recovery and long-term recovery, and what really makes it a disaster is when you need resources to recover, and that's that money coming back and other things like that. So that's the definition of disaster. Emergency is when you need additional resources to respond. Disaster is when you not only need additional resources to respond, but you need additional resources to put it all back together and rebuild. Okay? A catastrophic disaster is the highest order one of those. A catastrophic disaster is when things are so bad that the services that governments usually provide are flat on their back. You can't do it anymore, right? So you need extraordinary services. So we've had a whole bunch of catastrophic disasters last year, right? Puerto Rico comes to mind, right? Lost all their power. It's taken months and months and months to get it back. A lot of their normal functions in healthcare and everything else can't function. That's a catastrophic disaster. On the Keys, Florida Keys, Irma was a catastrophic disaster, right? And Harvey certainly was in the region of Texas that it impacted. So when we can no longer perform our services that we normally do for an extended length of time, then it's a catastrophic disaster. In the case of law enforcement, when they can no longer function and the criminal justice system no longer works, like Katrina, then you get into martial law situations. That's obviously a catastrophic disaster because the criminal justice system is broken down. So really, really important about those definitions as they go up, and they kind of build upon themselves and go up. And then we have both short and long-term recovery. Short-term recovery is getting things back to where the essential services work, and people can flick on their lights and turn on their faucet, and they get all those kind of things. Long-term recovery is making sure the businesses are back and the community's vibrant again and all kind of stuff. The government recovery phase is that short-term one, making sure the essential services are back, and that helps encourage the return to normalcy, the new normal. So any questions about this really busy slide? As I say, I'll pass this on to your leadership and they can post it or get it out to you if you want. We have three main hazards that we deal with in emergency management, three principal categories. And there can be crossover because one can kick off another one. But our most reliable, consistent, year in and year out opponent is Mother Nature, right? And we all know that because nobody probably gets as impacted as much as you with a natural event. Storms, floods, mudslides, all that kind of stuff. You're the ones that end up dealing with this. But Mother Nature is again constantly throwing stuff our way. But Mother Nature has a wide range, right? Sometimes it's just nuisance level stuff and it doesn't rise to the level of emergencies. But sometimes it gets bad. Sometimes it can get really bad. So there's nobody here that was working in Public Works in 1965, was there? Yeah, just checking. So in 1965, we had the biggest outbreak of tornadoes our region's ever seen. We had 4 EF4 tornadoes go through our county all in one night in the space of a couple hours, right? Some of them even crossed paths up in Fridley, and they think over in Wayzata, right? So long track tornadoes, ones that were on the ground for quite a while, right? So that kind of, if we had one of those, and the return rate on those isn't very close, but a lot of the experts down in Oklahoma City at the National Weather Service kind of think we're due. They're like really surprised that we haven't had one of these big outbreaks again for a while. So that's kind of ominous when you talk to those folks and they're kind of like, yeah, boy, our little betting pool in the office says that, you guys are due from the National Weather Service. It's like, ooh, that's a little scary, gets your attention. But if we were to have one of those kind of things, you guys would be on the front lines because there's debris everywhere. There's stuff that needs to be blocked off and barricaded, and services need to be returned. But that's a lot of amazing stuff. And we'd be overwhelmed pretty quickly because many, many, many communities at once would be impacted, right? Or if we didn't have an outbreak, if we had a Joplin type thing, just a super wide, super powerful tornado on a single track that went through several communities, we'd also have a lot of challenges. But suffice to say that Mother Nature is going to be your most reliable, consistent opponent. Then we have industrial processes. Now, fortunately, Minnetonka doesn't have a lot of complex manufacturing and all this kind of stuff. You don't have really super busy rail routes. I guess you got the BNSF. If you had a derailment, this is down in Ellendale. This is just in 2016, and they had a derailment. Several cars of all kinds of exotic chemicals now leaking and hissing and spewing, and they had to evacuate the little town of Ellendale. And nothing gets railroad people more excited than their rail route being blocked. I mean, the evacuation of the town and all these toxic kind of things are nuisances, but boy, they got to get that rail line open because it's costing them money, right? So they decided to take the most aggressive posture and blow up those trains in place, and did that in the middle of the night and all kinds of crazy stuff. So, but if you have a locale that has these industrial processes or transportation, that's your next most consistent opponent, right? Is getting these things going. And then you'll be working with industry because they'll have the specialty teams to do all this kind of stuff, but you'll be asked to support that. And then, of course, you have adversarial threats. And this has been something that's been growing over the last 20 years, but I mean, it can happen here too. So this is the St. Cloud Mall. Remember the guy, kind of Al-Qaeda or Al-Shabaab inspired individual that was going to run around and stab people in the mall? These kind of things occur as well, and they're very quick incidents. They're quick acting, so it's all over in a moment, but that's just the response phase. Then it's the recovery phase, and again, you'll have a lot of parts in that. So the incident phases, now that's our threats and hazards. How about the incident phases? Well, there is a cycle that's continuously in operation in emergency management, and these things are all important. The number one thing we can do for us, if we have a way to do it, is prevent it from ever occurring in the beginning, right? So all of us grew up with Smokey Bear, only you can prevent forest fires. That's a prevention kind of thing. So if we can take a preventive action to make sure a disaster doesn't happen, that's what we want to do. The next thing we do is mitigation, and mitigation is trying to decrease the damage caused by these things. We can't prevent them from happening, but we can sure make it easier to deal with. So something like a flood levee, that's something that would, we know the river is going to flood or the creek is, but if we get out there and mitigate, the flood's not going to be as severe. So if we preserve some wetlands and store some of that water, next time that flood or that creek rises, it's not going to cause so much damage. So mitigation is important. Preparedness, what we're doing right now, training, learning, equipping, buying some equipment for and tucking it away for emergencies, maybe drills and exercises. That preparation piece is what's going to spell success or failure oftentimes in your response. You have a disaster event, and the lights and siren phase and getting out there and doing your stuff, that's called the response. And response lasts as long as we need to guarantee life safety and to stabilize the scene, make sure that whatever's causing this problem has stopped. That is the kind of the measure of the response phase. Once that happens, you're into the recovery phase. And the recovery phase, again, is long, long lasting. If you went down to New Orleans or the Gulf Shore, Biloxi, they'd still be recovering from Katrina. And that happened in 2005. So recovery takes a long time. Most responses are bottom up. So if you like the Hollywood disaster movies and the federal government coming out there and FEMA showing up and legions of military troops taking over, that's a great Hollywood script, but it doesn't work very well in real life. Okay? So quick, anybody know how many ambulances the FBI has? Or fire trucks? Or public works vehicles? Anything? They have 0, right? So it's really cool that they can show up and go, yeah, move that over there and we're in charge and all kind of stuff, but it really doesn't happen that way. They depend on the local government to do their work, even in a terrorist incident where they do have authority. But if you read the Constitution, so if it's late at night, you're trying to figure out ways to sleep, dig out the Constitution, read that, works like a charm. But if you do read it, you'll notice that the way our government works, the way our system works is if it's specified or mentioned in the Constitution as belonging to the federal government, they get it. It's their job. But what you'll never see in the Constitution is anything about disasters and emergencies. And since it's not mentioned in the Constitution, it belongs to the states and the local units of government below states. So we own disasters. We can't, go, thank God the federal government's here, we're just going to leave now and you guys let us know when we can come back. It doesn't work that way. Cities are always in charge of their response, and counties are always in charge to back them up and do the services that we do. Local government is the most important aspect of any kind of emergency, right? There's a very few instances where it's top down. So if somebody attacks us, if North Korea sends the missiles over, yeah, it's a federal response, right? Terrorism is a shared response. The FBI has to be there, but the locals are working it too. The federal government's in charge of environmental response, if it's only environmental, right? But if it has a life safety aspect for human safety, then it's shared again. How do we know this? How can we test this? How can we see this in operation? Pentagon, 9/11, jetliner slams into the Pentagon. Pentagon, most powerful building on earth, right? The National Command Authority, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Secretary of the Air Force, the Army, Navy, they're all there, right? Who's in charge? Who's in charge of that response? Get all these generals and colonels streaming out and admirals and everything like that, looking for shelter and trying to get away from the burning building. Who's in charge? Jim knows this one. Jim, who's in charge of that? Local. Arlington County Fire Chief, charge of that response during the life safety phase. So again, you could have the most powerful building on earth with a lot of super talented and handsome, good-looking military folks or whatever. It's not going to be the SEAL Team 6 in charge of that response. It's going to be your local fire authorities and the public works folks and police and everybody else who goes along with it, okay? Because that's the phase that they're in. So I just want to make sure that you all of us, know that how responsible we are in our communities and how it's all going to fall on you. And the eyes are going to be on you. How are you doing your stuff, right? Again, late night reading, looking for a way to fall asleep. Look up Chapter 12 of Minnesota statutes. That's the emergency management statutes, and it tells you specifically what kind of powers you have. And the powers are amazing, right, that you get. It defines what emergency management is. And emergency management really is everything minus military stuff. So if it's a civilian function, it gets to be coordinated by emergency management. But don't be fooled, we don't do it. It's not emergency management that actually goes out and does it. Because for a county of 1.3 million people, how big is our emergency management office? 8. We have 8 people. So we're not coming out and making sure the water's running. We're not climbing down into manholes, and we're not removing all the debris. We're not setting up a perimeter. We're not putting wet stuff on red stuff. But we're making sure that it's all being done. And if you need anything to get your job done, then it goes through our system to get you the stuff that you need. The people you need, the resources you need, the money you need, all that stuff. That's our job. We coordinate. We coordinate everything minus the military stuff. So this statute requires you to have an emergency manager, an appointed one, and a backup, right? It confers powers on your city council and the county and the governor. Provides for moving assets around. So if we're looking we don't have to negotiate a mutual aid agreement, we can use Chapter 12. And it ensures disaster assistance, money flows down to you in a disaster. This is a typical incident command. Now, I think Jim's going to talk about incident command later, the actual ICS system. But it's important for you to know that incident command is out there at the scene when there is incident command in effect. And they'll use kind of whatever they can. So if there's an old vacant building nearby, they might jump that in, set up incident command. They'll be using handheld radios. They got kind of folding chairs and charts and all that kind of stuff. It's not a big formal setting. I mean, it's a formal process, but it's not a big fancy building. They might just do it outside like this, with just little folding kits that pop up, and they have ICS forms and they have a chart. But this is who will be usually running your life safety response. It's oftentimes fire with all the folks that they have and how to run that, right? This is a very busy county emergency operations center in a small county in the Florida Keys, Monroe County. This is just last year, okay? It gets to be a super busy place. Do you always have an incident command? No, sometimes you don't. Sometimes they're run directly at the emergency operations center. Because if the disaster you have encompasses every square foot of Minnetonka and most of the county, you're not going to be able to set up little incident commands every place for every scene. So sometimes if a disaster is big enough and broad enough, it'll be run centrally through the emergency operations center. Okay? But other times, when you do have the on-scene aspects, then the emergency operations center will be your incident management. And that's what will be reinforcing or backing up your incident commander and making sure that they get the stuff that they need. That's what kind of a typical incident command post looks like. Sometimes there's fancy vehicles. If we request and get the sheriff's emergency response trailer, incident command trailer or vehicle, it'd be kind of looking like this. Staging. We're going to be asking you probably, hey, where's an area that we can set up staging? Because we need to bring in about 40 ambulances, to stage them. And then, you'll be offering up areas and stuff that we can use, right? Sometimes we'll do points of distribution. This is in Key West at the little park that we were able to use down in Key West to hand out water and food to people, right? This is in Marathon. This is the Brian of Marathon. This is Jimmy, the Public Works Director for Marathon, Florida. And they had some land and some facilities that we needed to set up a point of distribution, and everybody's coming and asking for stuff. So this ball field complex that the city owned became a staging area for law enforcement. So there was easily 70 squad cars laid out in the next field. It became public health, ESF 8, which is the health function. They set up like a sort of a hospital community there, and then we had this distribution site, and Jimmy made it all happen, right? And when we couldn't get the semis in because there was trees in the way, he sent people out. They cut them with the chainsaws and all kind of stuff so we can get the semis to turn and into this thing. And he was telling us, hey, can you keep the damage to these fields down to just this area and that area, kind of coordinate that out. But extremely essential. We couldn't have done all the stuff that we needed to do without the full participation of the public works in that city, right? We were working at the county level. I was working from Monroe County, but the cities that we were operating in, super important, right? I think that might be it for, yeah. You guys will go into National Incident Management System. There's Incident Command, which is part of the National Incident Management System, and Jim's going to talk to you about that. That's what kind of the field operations are. But then the broader picture, the bigger picture is the National Incident Management System, and that gets into talking about the terminology and the languages and the structures that we use, and the way we talk about resources and resource typing and all kinds of stuff. But I'm not sure how deeply we'll get into that. So, and then that's the debris stuff. So I'll get into that a little bit. Any questions for me? So, excellent. Appreciate it. And you have a different set of slides.
Wired for sound.
Oh, yeah. I'll test it before I hand it back.
I'll retest it.
Still working.
How's that? Hear me? We're good? Okay. So, we need to change the slide deck. Going to the Bulbit slide deck. Okay, so the majority of the things I'm going to talk to you about, it falls under the term or the definition of incident management systems. And the reason we wanted to do that today was to discuss just that When you're doing field operations, know that there's a bigger framework already in place to support you, and that the stuff that you're doing out there is pretty vital for us to get to the next phase of even recovery if we have to do that. Brian and Eric both mentioned short and long-term recovery. Short-term, not as complex. Long-term gets to be complex. So the stuff that you're initially doing after that incident happened, the first 24 hours, is pretty important for us at the county level. So we want you to know that you're part of a bigger picture. But before we do that, we wanted to talk about damage assessment. Brian mentioned that when we started. The term I have up is rapid assessment. Someone help me out. I want some interaction. Give me a general term of damage assessment. What are we doing? Getting the roads open. Exactly. What else? What are we trying to find? If a storm hits Minnetonka, what do we want to know? What works and what doesn't? Exactly. What about the footprint? Or is that what we're looking for? We want to know what got hit, where, to give us an idea, okay, that's going to be the center of our operations, correct? So that falls under a rapid assessment. There's some terms I'm going to throw up on damage assessment that might be a little confusing. And don't worry, everyone else is confused too, because terminology and assessment gets to be complex. But we're going to break it down to really a 5th grade level, and we're doing this with our own departments as well, because there really is no standard for damage assessment across Hennepin County. And we're looking to change that, because there might be times where you're called to assist a neighboring county or a neighboring city, and you want to know that what you do translates to what they're going to do. So that's a process that's going on right now in Hennepin County. So here's my 5th grade breakdown. Who, what, when, why, how, right? Well, let's start with what. So this is rapid damage assessment. What is it? So it's an approach to figure out the extent of life safety, the imminent hazards, and damage to critical infrastructure. So that gentleman's doing his own personal damage assessment in his home, right? Not really happy what happened. But this is what we're looking to do. Find the extent of the damage and find out what inside is critical. And critical is something that the city of Minnetonka has already taken on and completed. We can know about trees and power lines down, and that's good because we want to clear the roads. But what's critical to the city of Minnetonka? And Jim Flanders has already done that. And that would be one of the things we want to do with assessment is, so where are you going to go first? If you know that Ridgedale was impacted, is that where you're going to go first? What about a nursing home? In that area of damage, let's go to the places that are deemed critical by your city. And we're going to clear the roads to get first responders in there if people are injured or hurt. So why? Because we want to prioritize resources. Eric has brought up a couple times in different presentations the 2011 tornado that hit St. Louis Park, Golden Valley, and then Minneapolis. For power outage information, where do you think the utilities went first? What city did they go to? Who got hit first? St. Louis Park, right? So utilities went there because that was the first call for service. Where was the heavily most impacted area? Minneapolis, right? So it started in St. Louis Park, very narrow tornado, and expanded out and then became a half-mile wide tornado in Minneapolis. So a lot of the local fire departments were really upset because they needed the resources to go to Minneapolis, where all of a sudden Xcel Energy said, well, we're already in Golden Valley and St. Louis Park. So again, we're trying to identify the areas that are hit the hardest so we can get resources to there. So this is my crazy slide. So this is the importance of rapid damage assessment because it kicks off recovery, which is can be very long process. So we have our incident that happens on the left-hand side of the slide. Emergency response takes place in about the first 48 hours. Incident stabilization of the 10 days. So we call that operations and Band-Aid people-centric. Well, what else is happening at that time when you're doing assessment? We have debris management, potentially emergency housing, public information, resource management, which I'll talk to you in a little bit about, utility restoration. And then that assessment can go through the short-term phase, which, like I said, is up to about 10 days. And that's usually what we see in Hennepin County or have seen with our storms. We've had 3 presidential disaster declarations in 5 years. Did anyone know that? No? So we've taken some hits. We haven't taken the big hits like you've seen in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, or Joplin. But we've had enough damage and operational staff costs that we've had actual presidential damage or disaster declarations in just that first 10 days. What happens when we get beyond that? What if we did take a Joplin-style hit? What's going to be happening? That's when you get into reconstruction. That's when you get other people involved other than public works, fire, and hospitals and EMS, right? That's when we're starting to talk about how do we build back the community, right? What do we do to sustain this in the future? How do we become resilient? Those are really hot topic terms right now in emergency management. And that takes place beyond those first 10 days. The Presidential Disaster Declaration, the last one, which was 2016, was when the north side of Hennepin County had about 10 inches of rain in 4 hours. So if you lived in Maple Grove or Brooklyn Park, that was a big deal for you. Maybe the rest of the county didn't see it because they got up to maybe 2 inches of rain, right? That disaster declaration was about a 6-month period. Remember the Northridge earthquake back in 1991? Anyone remember that? The big earthquake out in California? That recovery period was 21 years. 21 years from the time of impact to the point where the last person or business had financial reimbursement from FEMA. So that's the kind of process that can take place in some of the bigger disasters. Luckily, we haven't seen that in a while. Like Eric mentioned, 1965. If we saw something like 1965 today, that is problematic. Are there more houses than there were back then? A lot more densely populated area, a lot more infrastructure in the tornado paths that we saw back then. That's the kind of stuff that we really worry about and why it's important to get that data from you folks who are out in the field early on so we get a bigger picture of what really happened out there, because then we start having to move. So when rapid assessment takes place about 0 to 48 hours, 48 hours is pushing it, but we have had hazards that have cascading effects. So something happens and then maybe the next day we get hit by another event, so that rapid assessment keeps going. Usually it's about 0 to 12, 0 to 16 hours when we're doing assessment. As Brian said, sometimes that's in the dark, right? So we call these things windshield surveys. We don't necessarily want people to get out of their vehicles for the most point. We just want to drive down those roads and get an idea of what happened. There are times where these things do hit earlier on in the day. If you remember last year, we had that June 11th storm that came cranking through in the morning. I think it hit at 9 a.m. Caused a lot of the damage up in Anoka County, and I think Hennepin County, but Brooklyn Park had a lot of hail damage. But for the most part, because severe weather happens later in the day, it's at night when we're going out and doing operations and then getting up the next day and finding, okay, I had an idea in the dark, but what did this really look like? So those are the objectives. Again, we're ensuring life safety, determining where local resources should go, prioritizing response, and then seeking federal assistance. Again, we're at the county level, that's our kind of our charge, right? So we're always thinking money, right? We're here to support you in operations, but we're always thinking of, okay, let's get numbers here and kind of find out what's going on, because we need to think ahead, in case, the state calls and said, hey, where are you at with your threshold for declaration? Which happens usually a couple days after an event, especially a bigger one. Okay, so here's the terminology I was talking about in the beginning. Rapid damage assessment, initial damage assessment, and preliminary damage assessment. Does everyone think that that's kind of the same terminology? Everyone would think, well, initially I'm going to go out, that's initial assessment. Preliminary, I need to get preliminary numbers, that's right away. Rapid, that's right away. This is why this is a confusing topic to a lot of people, and why, even though you might understand assessment enough to do it, you might not know exactly what to look for, or that bigger picture I talk about. What would they need from me? What do I need to tell them what I saw out there? So time frames, initial assessments, 48 hours to 2 weeks. So really Public Works might be involved at that initial portion of it, but when we stretch out to weeks, you really go away, and then the county departments step in and say, okay, we're going to get a lot of forms from the state of Minnesota. They're going to ask for numbers. We're going to reach out to Jim. We're going to reach out to Brian, and they're going to get us some identified numbers on what kind of vehicles did they use. How many people were out there? What kind of operations were going on? What kind of costs are incurring here that we can give to the county to provide to the state to see if there are any kind of financial reimbursement coming back. Does this happen a lot? Are we out in the field a lot? This is just a small list of some of the events we've had since 1904 that have had us in the field doing damage assessment. In our office, we do this quite a bit. We have a couple teams we send out, And we do that because we found out that a lot of the cities, Hennepin County's, the engagement threshold in Hennepin County is pretty unique. We have cities like Minneapolis that can primarily take care of themselves with this kind of thing. But when we get out west, we have cities like Greenfield, Maple Plain, Independence that are not as resource heavy. So we usually point west or southwest, because if we've got enough information that, yeah, they got clocked, we're going to go support them because we know they're going to need it, and they're going to be doing operations. So City of Greenfield, for instance, their emergency management director is the public works director. That's the only public works director that holds the emergency management director title in Hennepin County. And he has 3 people. That's it. And the sheriff's office has primary law enforcement responsibility in that city. So we go out to support them. So know that we are an asset, and if we did get called, we come out to Minnetonka to assist you. But most of the time, we're putting our efforts towards some of the smaller communities. So here's us. I talked a little bit about what, this is what we do on a large, grand scale. So the things in red are focused on more assessment and recovery.
Can you read a question in the back here?
Oh, yes.
What was that, Greco or Greco?
Oh, derecho. Thanks for looking at that term. So anyone else ever heard the term derecho? That's a fancy term. So a derecho is a very, very high-end wind event. So they don't really call them straight line winds anymore. Well, they do, but they've kind of broken it into 2 things, which is more confusing. So mesoscale convective system, or MCS, which we might be looking at for Wednesday night, Wednesday morning, is a wind event that you usually see at the 65-mile-an-hour wind gusts, right? Derecho is when you have 70-plus mile-an-hour winds, help me out, over a 4-hour period with... It's got to go 300 miles, and you have to have, I think, a couple different areas where 70-plus mile-an-hour winds affect communities. So,
linear hurricane.
yeah. So if anyone was here in 1998 and remembers this, it was such a big event that they actually named it. So they do name derechos, but it's not as sexy as tornadoes. But it was called the Southern Great Lakes Derecho of 1998. So that was the wind that was dropping winds of over 120 miles an hour, I believe, in Scott County. I think in Hennepin County we had between 80 and 85.
If you remember the Boundary Waters blowdown,
Right.
July 4th, 1999, just took all those white pine and just laid them down, all in the same direction.
Right.
That's different than a tornado, which misses them off. But they just lay them down like you took a comb and went through the forest. But that started in North Dakota, and it actually is the longest derecho on record, and it went all the way across the Canadian-U.S. border and hit the Atlantic, twisted around, and came back in Virginia. So that's how long they can last, for several days, and they're very, very destructive events.
And one of the reasons they go on and go on and go on and they don't stop is what they're called forward propagating. So they're actually tilted forward. So this isn't a Skywarn class, so I won't go too much into severe weather, but in a normal thunderstorm, the updrafts and the downdrafts are like this, right? They go up and down, and eventually the downdraft will kill the storm. And so usual thunderstorms only last a couple hours. In supercells or derecho style events where they're tilted, the downdraft can't beat the updraft that's going like this because it's tilted. So those things go for miles and miles and miles. So like the 1999 blowdown, they had damage from northern Minnesota through Ontario and Quebec, and then, like Eric said, hit the northeast United States. So their forecasting is getting better, and we're really derecho country up here. That's one of the big things we really worry about. And that's usually from the mid-June to early July timeframe is when we've seen those things. And for whatever reason, the 4th of July weekend and the 4th of July week is, if you looked at the history of derechos, that's the time when you get clocked by those things. If you remember the July 5th storm from 16, where the transmission lines were blown down from Hanover to Maple Grove, that was not as high as a derecho, but a multi-convective system that went through that night. So who does damage assessment? Again, in Hennepin County, we're still trying to figure that out. We might be a lot more unique than other counties across the country. Usually it's around the same disciplines that do this stuff, so we know that law enforcement and fire and public works are our main providers. CERT is a term for Community Emergency Response Teams, and those are just people who are very passionate, like your neighbors, are passionate about response and helping their neighbors, and they want to get involved with some kind of emergency response organization. So some cities form CERT teams, and CERT teams can be used for that kind of thing. So it's something that the cities really need to figure out if they want to get their people involved in that sort of thing. But it would help, especially in those bigger events that go through, to get more people out there to do this kind of thing. And again, training them on what to look for. They really need to know what they're going to look for. So the how, so this is just our operational continuum with Hennepin County Emergency Management, and this is in a way how we can support you and how we provide information to Jim and Brian. So we have what they call a 24-hour on-call duty officer, and that's called Hennepin Watch. So if you've seen the movie Titanic, and the person's up on the top and he says, "Iceberg right ahead," that's us, right? We can't have anyone surprised by hazards that affect us. We just went through a 3-year mitigation hazard assessment study and found out that there are 63 hazards that affect Hennepin County. Known hazards, 63, in the sandbox of natural, industrial, and adversarial threats. So we have always got to be on the lookout for what's on the horizon. If Hennepin Watch finds out that, let's use a severe weather scenario, right? So out in South Dakota, there's a massive front blowing up late at night, right? And the Weather Service is saying, hey, this might be the derecho that's going to hit Hennepin County at 3 in the morning. So that Hennepin Watch is kind of, rub his eyes and stay up through the night or set an alarm clock for 1 o'clock to find out, hey, is this thing really coming? If it is, we get a hold of our director, and we activate this thing called a situation monitoring station. Well, different from an emergency operations center, but it gives us flexibility to provide information to you ahead of time so you don't just get blasted and not know it's coming. That's part of our deal in emergency management. We need to be providing situational awareness. So let's just take an example of that. We do get hit by 100+ mile-an-hour winds. We get a lot of calls from incident commanders saying, hey, we need some support here. I can deal with the here and now, what's in front of me, but we need to plan for the next operational period. Or even the county calls us at a higher level and says, hey, we lost a bunch of buildings. This is a continuity of operations issue. Then we would open up an emergency operations center. And that's when we're actually supporting the cities and supporting our county departments at a higher level. But situation monitoring stations is more of upfront, get information out, do immediate impact reconnaissance afterwards. Let's find the footprint of what happened. And then after the EOC is shut down, we go back to Hennepin Watch. So that's just kind of our continuum in how we provide information and support to you. So here's this breakdown of situation monitoring station of what we do. Again, it's really about creating situational understanding. And the great thing is we have staff there. Eric mentioned we have 8 full-time staff, but we also have amateur radio volunteers. We have part-time staff. So in a bigger event, we can go up to about 15 or 16 deep to support you. So, and again, I think the real big reason to get the SMS up and running is because we can do things that are very similar to an emergency operations center, not have to activate one. So we're separate. We're very different from coastal communities like Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, where if a hurricane's coming, you think they open their EOC a lot, or like ahead of time? They do, because they know that there's a pretty good chance that they're going to take a pretty big hit, and they're going to have damage, and they're going to incur cost. So opening up an EOC is very easy for them. Up here, we don't see those kind of hazards. Right? We have hours ahead of time for knowing we're going to get impacted. We don't have days. And another thing was if we open up an EOC, we know we're going to incur costs at the county level as well. So that's not necessarily our call. That's a county administrator call to say, hey, our recommendation is to open this. We've had enough requests from the cities to do this, so we need to do that, and they usually make the call. But again, separate from coastal states for EOCs. So this is an information email that would go out to Jim and would go out to Brian that gives you an idea when we activate SMS what we're doing. So the bottom line statement says, due to a tornado watch being issued, the potential for damaging winds or tornadoes, we're activating at 6 p.m. So how are we going to push information to you? We're going to push information to you through a system called WebEOC, which I'll talk about next. But then also, there's an ICS 205. That's an incident command system term for a radio communications plan. So what we want to do is gather situational awareness for everybody. So one of our staff will call the sheriff's radio and say, hey, we need an armored talk group for the night. They say, okay, you can have H-Pool 2. So then we'll send an email out that says, hey, it's like that. Everything's going to be on H-Pool 2 tonight. So all the cities in Hennepin County should be turning to H-Pool 2 to listen for what's going on. So that's how we're coordinating damage assessment right now. And then we have a spotter statement because we have our own spotter group, believe it or not. We're just finally getting our own spotter group that we can control and activate. That gives you information on weather reports, so if there is tornadoes out there, they can tell us. If there's damaging winds, if there is excessive rainfall, that's kind of information you need to know ahead of time. So this is how we coordinate messages through email. How do we change from immediate, or how do we do immediate impact reconnaissance? So there's a system called FATPOT. Raise your hand if you've heard that. Yeah, I don't know how they, is that the name of the vendor, FATPOT? So FATPOT, so we don't have just one CAD system in Hennepin County, we have several. So we needed a software program that took all the information and plopped it on the one screen for us. So we know all of the data coming in from 911 calls. So if we're getting enough on damage assessment reports through FATPOT, we'll go out. If Hennepin West Mesonet, which is another system I'll talk to you in a second, gives us information of 60 plus mile an hour winds, we'll go out. Why 60? Do things usually fall down at 60 miles an hour? Yes. Yes. The majority of times, yes. If it's really been a heavy rainfall year, yes. And then municipal storm damage reports. So if we're getting reports from you who are out in the field doing damage assessment, we'll go out. So again, the importance of what you're telling us. So we're trying to standardize damage assessment in Hennepin County, and this is our first shot at it. So we've created a rapid damage assessment field guide that we've started to train our sheriff's office on, our own staff, and then we're going to be training the North Area Planning Group, which is in the northern cities of Hennepin County, that's taken this on initially to be kind of our testbed project. And the reason we picked the North is because in 2016 they had the transmission line blow out on storm, and they had the heavy rain event and said, hey, we need to figure this out. We need to figure out damage assessment. You know, use us as a test bed for how we're going to standardize this. What does it look like? Who are the people? What are the procedures? If there's technology, can we bring in technology? What is this going to look like? So we'll take the North Group information, provide it to the rest of the county. The field assessment book looks at, you know, the do's and don'ts of assessment. You know, what do I do? What don't I do? And then it gets into individual assistance and public assistance. So those are terms for federal reimbursement, which is not a rapid assessment phase. It's one down the line. But if you're out there that night and you're seeing search and rescue operations, you actually have trucks out there. You're taking debris off the roads. There's evacuations going on. That's incurring cost. So we want to put in the book that kind of stuff so you can go, oh, wait a minute, we're doing that, we're doing that. Okay, I'm going to get that information to Brian. Brian's going to tell the county that this is what I'm seeing. And that gets our head thinking, okay, now we got to start thinking about the next phase. So more to come on this. Oh, and then tree damage reporting. This is something Eric put in there. We'll get odd reports of tree damage. We've had a couple storms go through where they're like, I got a 20-inch radius tree down. We don't actually take radius reports. We want to know the diameter of trees. So we've tried to standardize tree damage reporting because realistically, in a severe weather event, most of the calls that come in are usually power lines or trees down. So let's get an idea of what is a 50-inch diameter tree down. If we then confirm with the wind reports that we saw that night, yeah, that's a little more legitimate for a 70-plus mile-an-hour wind event, where if it's a 40-inch diameter tree down with a 30-mile-an-hour wind, okay, let's get a better understanding of this. So just know that that's coming down the line. We're also trying to standardize reporting. This is a military crash grid that Eric has brought into our office, which is a really good accountability way to identify where you're at and what you're seeing. And it's simply Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta. So we've Identified number system, you can't see this. I can provide it to Jim and Brian down the line because like I said, we're trying to flush this thing out. So if I'm an assessment team and I'm going up to Hanover, I'm in, I think, 1. And then that square is Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and just cut it into 4. So I'd say I'm field operations ready, I'm going to 1 Alpha. And that's all they need to know is I'm going to be up in that northwest part of Hennepin County. And then once I report, it's more of the street level reporting. I'm on the corner of 48th Avenue and Johnson. All right, so that's, again, we're just trying to get a little more clear understanding of damage assessment. And then where, obviously, Hennepin County. I talked about the engagement threshold, that, we have smaller cities that have less resources compared to some of our bigger cities. But we're looking to, obviously cover our county. So that's damage assessment. Any questions on that? WebEOC. So I said we're heavy into situational awareness and providing some kind of common operating picture of what's happened. Quick history lesson: back in 2006, a lot of our cities got together with us and said, hey, we need some kind of a tool so everyone knows what's going on. Because people get hit and we find out hours later, and that's just not okay. So back in 2007, we purchased WebEOC, which is web-based crisis information tool to provide that for all our cities and all our county departments. And throughout the years of really testing it out and figuring out what's best practice and what have we done and what can we do better, I think we really have a handle on this now. So you saw that email that I put up there about we've created an incident in WebEOC. So if there was a big event and it hit Minnetonka, just know that there's a website you can go to, Brian can go to, and Jim has gone to, and you can get all the damage assessment information or all storm-related information on that site. And again, that's pulling information from FATPOT, that's pulling information from municipal storm reports, it's utility outage information. That's our job when we activate SNMS, is to get all that information so people know what is going on and where did it get hit. If you're a mutual aid request to a neighboring community, at least you knew ahead of time that they did get blasted, and that's one of the ways you can look for it. It's built using boards. I won't talk through all this, but there's a daily situational awareness board, and that's just the here and now. What's the fire danger today? We put it in there. Is there a risk of severe weather Wednesday night? We put it in there. So that's the information you'd see going in today. If it becomes an incident, we'll open that, but we also have damage assessment. We're putting all the critical infrastructure in Hennepin County in that system. There's an incident resource inventory system, or IRIS, which I'll talk to you about in a second. But this is all, this is one of your emergency management resources tools. So within WebEOC is the IRIS system. We're trying to build a resource management tool in Hennepin County. There was one that started years ago. Is it Rapid, Jim? Rapid, which was primarily fire assets. Tried, and went for a while, and then I don't know if funding got in the way or just it was a very administratively heavy tool that people couldn't put the time towards. So when we built WebEOC, we purchased WebEOC, we thought, hey, we need a resource management tool within there. We need everyone to know what exists in Hennepin County. If it's a fire asset, hospital asset, law enforcement, public works, let's get it in there. Because if you need a wood chipper or a Type 2 dump truck, you're so inundated with field operations, you need that kind of information, you can go in the system and find out what your neighbors have. Right now, it's mostly public works assets. Why do you think that is? Why do we start with public works? Yeah, you have resources, and it's always the most need. We're never going to get a call in our office for a fire truck. That's a mutual aid thing, right? No one's going to call emergency management and say, get me a fire truck. But what we do get calls for are specialized equipment that people have no idea where it exists. So I need a 30-foot tower light. I need a wood chipper. Get me a Bobcat, right? So knowing that, we built this system up with over 1,200 items right now. I think 60% of the cities have put their stuff in there, of mostly public works specialized equipment. It also includes our equipment. So we actually have a disaster cache of equipment as well that you could utilize in the early stages of an incident prior to you getting all your stuff out in the field or purchasing or leasing equipment. We've tried to build up our cash as well. So you'll see our stuff, some county departments like the Sheriff's Office and County Transportation Operations, our county's version of Public Works. All their stuff is in there too. We just got their list of 760 items. So we're trying to build this resource management tool for you to use. Hennepin West Mesonet. Anyone heard of this? Jim? We're putting a weather station up in your city. Two. One at Hopkins High School, and then the county home school. So the reason behind this is where we get active in the preparation phase, and we call remote sensors the near-term preparation phase. So if I want to go back to the origins of how this started, you don't necessarily need to know. There's a lot of storm spotters out there. There's a lot of storm chasers, believe it or not, that come from Oklahoma and Kansas into Minnesota during our biggest outbreaks. That's what they do. They love this stuff. So getting tornado reports isn't necessarily hard. We also have radar indicated. Wind reports are another thing. You usually don't have a storm spotter who sits out there with a wind anemometer and goes, yeah, I got 60-mile-an-hour winds being blown over, so I'm going to report it. That just doesn't happen. There's weather stations at airports, and there's weather stations used by MnDOT. So actually, right off Minnetonka Boulevard here, there's a station up on the hill. The only issue with those are they report every hour. So what's that going to do to help you? It's not, right? So they use it for different things. So we wanted to build a network of stations that could gather environmental hazard information at a quicker return rate. So our weather stations report every minute. So that is really crucial for severe weather information. We're building this out. This is just a definition of the system, a picture of what the site looks like. It's a free site you can access. There is no passcode. But these are our needs. So we're looking for severe extreme winds. We want to know about excessive rainfall. That's one of the things that's really happening more and more these days. We're getting the excessive rainfall storms not only in Hennepin, but in the state of Minnesota. Fire weather, excessive heat or humidity. We're a continental polar environment here, right? So we get that every year. Soil conditions. We had a big landslide occur back in 2014. That pretty much alone got us a presidential disaster declaration. Stream flow. We have a lot of rivers and creeks that go through Hennepin County. We want to know when those are flooding. Frost depth. So in 2013, if you remember the really, really cold year, or going back to the 1980s cold style year we had, did a lot of problems underground. So we're putting frost depth sensors in the ground on some of these, which is a big public works need. Freezing rain sensors, stations that can identify wind shear rotation and dispersion characteristics. So if we get a train derailment and there's a toxic release, we can get that data. So it's a really good tool for you. It's a tool Jim uses during severe weather. A lot of our cities plug into that. That's what one of the main pages looks like. So the numbers on the screen are where we have weather stations. And that's your peak winds. So we'll look at that, and it's returning every minute. So if we hit 60 some miles an hour, we know that's a problem. If it hits 70 miles an hour in Hennepin County, we're starting to activate sirens, because that's our threshold for siren activation. So it's a public warning tool, and it's a decision support tool. Got a lot of feedback. Eric always likes to say that this is like the Field of Dreams concept that we're building. We're building it and they'll come. We're getting a lot of different partners we never would have thought of that are really jumping on board to get the data and use the data. So, and on the right, the very top right, it says wind map with an arrow going down. We can actually change that to a now extreme precipitation map. So if we're getting rainfall, 2-inch an hour rainfall reports, that's pretty good indication of flash flooding. So we'll have that information as well. So just know that it exists out there, and it's hennepinwestmesonet.org. And again, you can go to that site anytime to get that information. Again, preparation tool for you to utilize. So that is me, and we're going to go to a break. 10 minutes? Take a 10-minute break, and we'll be back to talk about debris management.
All right. Clicker. There we go. Thank you so much. All right, we'll get started again. We're going to talk about debris. which is a huge element of any kind of response and recovery. A lot of the things we talk about, whether they're windstorms or tornadoes or floods or even structural events, produce just incredible amounts of debris. And initially it's a problem because you may have to get through debris to get to people who are trapped in debris. And then it's also a problem of disposal and categorization, all kind of stuff. So debris management and how we approach debris is a very, very significant part of our operation. And it's really right in your wheelhouse. It's right where you are, because you're the ones on the first line of defense against how we approach debris and how we handle it. And so the more work you can do in advance and prepare to handle it and have a concept of how you want to handle it and have sites picked out where you're gonna, where you're gonna perform this operation is really gonna make a big difference. Last week I was down at a FEMA course, Federal Emergency Management Agency course in Anniston, Alabama. They took over the old Fort McClellan, for any of you who have military backgrounds. And Fort McClellan was, used to be the chemical training site for the Army and military police and a bunch of other stuff. And so in 2000, the Army walked away, flipped the keys to FEMA. FEMA stood it up as a school in like 2003. And I was first down there in 2005. It was kind of rugged, but they've improved it since then. And so anyway, I was down there last week. And the town to the north, which is Jacksonville, not Florida, but Jacksonville, Alabama, had a big tornado just about a month before. In fact, in April, 9th of April. And so they're still dealing with debris down there. This is from Friday of this week. This is piles of vegetative debris, trees and all kind of stuff. They've got it separated, which is one of the things you want to do, is separate it into classifications and stuff. And then another thing that they needed to do is reduce the volume, right? So how would you reduce volume of tree debris? You can burn it, you can chip it, right? There's all kinds of different stuff. But the whole idea is you can't really deal with that. It's a pretty massive pile. You want to take that and then shrink it down in some way. So they're going to have to do that kind of stuff. This is, so I'm kind of weird. I take pictures of debris piles wherever I go. But so I got a big collection. This is the debris management in Marathon, Florida. This is hurricane debris. This is from last year. And the hurricane landfall was the 10th of September, and this is the 19th of September. So this isn't too far removed from the initial period. But this is a pile of mixed debris. They just took everything and just put it in one place. So why would they do that? It's so much more neat to separate it. Any idea? Open the roadway, didn't have time. So this is right away, right afterwards. And Monroe County is a really bizarre county. It's really strange because it's a single county and it's 120 miles long with one road that goes through the middle, and it's never really more than a couple miles wide. So it makes a big difference if your roadway is open, because all you have is one roadway. So the thing that they needed to do is get out there and get that stuff right off the roads as soon as possible. So they didn't really have time to sort it out and go, oh, here's hazardous material here, and here's my laundry, stuff, and my white appliances, and all that kind of stuff. They just piled it all in one place. So that's one way to do it. It's not really the preferred method, but obviously if you're in a place like the Florida Keys, you got to do what you got to do, right? This is a different kind of debris. Here's the Minnehaha Academy explosion, right? This is structural collapse debris, right? And this is just a few hours after it happened, and this is the search for one of the two missing people. So this is where the custodian was. So they're gingerly picking their way through this debris. You couldn't climb on the debris pile at all because it's just too unstable. But this needs to go somewhere. This is an interesting kind of debris as well, because besides being not really natural, like trees and stuff, what's significant in this type of event about the debris? Evidence, right? There's going to be some kind of investigation, So the National Transportation Safety Board comes out because they're responsible for like pipeline transportation of that kind of stuff. They're going to investigate. So it really matters what you do with the debris and how you handle it and where it goes and how long it's stored. And so all kinds of different stuff like that. Debris from a disaster is almost always exempt from all the hazardous material kind of handling issues, the regulations. But that doesn't mean you can just do whatever you want with it still, right? So oftentimes debris is contaminated, right? And so even stuff that would normally not be a problem, like drywall, like if you have a flood, flooded drywall is always considered contaminated, so it needs to be handled in certain ways. So one of the things you may want to do is when you're doing your plans is identify vendors and different types of places that can handle that kind of debris and what you want to do with it. And you can put mixed debris that has partial contamination in landfills. But I know one of the big objectives is to not fill up your landfills, because you can have a year or two's worth of debris from out of a single event. And for some places and locations, that can jeopardize their overall landfill system, their overall garbage system. So again, that volume reduction is really super important in how you handle that, right? Ooh. Anybody remember what that is? Yeah, it's the 35W bridge collapse. And they spread out all those bridge components in the Bohemian Flats area just downstream from the bridge collapse. The bridge collapse happened on the 1st of August 2007. This picture was 7th of September 2010. So you might have some real estate close by that has stuff sitting on it for investigative evidence purposes for a long time until all the court stuff plays out, right? Why was it located where it's located? So we had talked about where does this debris go, but is that pretty heavy stuff? So you can't really take it up to Camp Ripley or something in central Minnesota. It would cost you an arm and a leg, right? So they look for something close by. If you're dealing with heavy structural collapse materials that are very substantial and would be very expensive to move, you're going to be finding a spot that's kind of close by where stuff has to sit and just await the outcome of all this kind of stuff. So that's kind of an interesting consideration too. So typically you want to have a separate standalone debris management plan in place, right? So that you can deal with the public's debris and then the institutional debris that the government is responsible for. Typically, if a tree falls down in somebody's yard or all that kind of stuff during a storm, they're responsible for that that removal and that how that goes. But if it's in a public area like a street or something like that, then it's our responsibility to do that, right? So the debris management plan needs to support your citizens, your residents, and as well as doing your own stuff. So I know you have a yard waste disposal site, I think back down by that ball field complex and stuff. Those tend to get really busy. Sometimes they open up satellite facilities too. I don't know, we had a huge windstorm in 2016, was it? 16 windstorm, largest power outage in the history of the state of Minnesota. Trees, was it 13? Yeah, 16 was the rain. So in 13, and a lot of wires down, a lot of trees down. Did you open up an additional yard waste site?
We're open 3 days a week normally, and we opened up for a week.
So you expanded your hours, okay. So some places expanded hours, some places had found parking lots, and other places a lot of times schools are closed for the summer, so they have a little extra space. So they were able to negotiate places where people could just throw those off, and then they had the chipping and mulching activities going on there for a while. So there's all kinds of different strategies. But helping your residents deal with their individual household, residential stuff is important. And then helping, obviously taking care of your own city stuff is important as well. And if you're going to list the support of your residents in separating the different types of waste, that would help too in your plan. So as they remove stuff from their damaged or destroyed homes, and put all their appliances in one place and all that kind of stuff, that helps you too in the long run. So you don't have to deal with those mixed debris piles as much. Any questions on debris? Excellent.
Just a stat, FEMA stat, I found in an annual research. In the last 5 years, 27% of federal reimbursement dollars that came through to cities or counties under public assistance was for removal of funds. That's how much, that's just one area that you can get reimbursement for. So always know that if there's a declaration afterwards of an event, those are things that you've incurred costs to be paid by.
Who's following me?
Planners.
Jim, so we got to get your slide down.
Well, that certainly works. All right, most of you grabbed the 2 handouts as you came in. You're going to need those. Not for taking notes right now, but as Brian alluded to, next session we'll get deeper into ICS. This is to sort of give you the high level information and enough to get you to pass the test. Nobody said there'd be a test. Well, guess what? There's a test. So, on all Public Works computers, there are 2 new icons. One says SSID, which is your FEMA student identification number. It's like your student number at your school. The other one, ICS 100 test. Both of those icons will be on all Public Works computers for the month of June. So there's your deadline. Your individual department managers and directors and things of that nature will be taking care of who's done what. So go online, get your SID. It's like a 16-digit number. You need that and your last name to do the test online. Once you successfully complete the test online, you'll get a PDF certificate. Forward that to your manager, director, whatever the case may be. That's how you'll get checked off. I will give you enough information in this presentation that there is no reason anybody who at least halfway stays awake shouldn't pass the test. Are we clear? Incident command system. Notice how there's a different colored font. Notice the color kind of jumps out at you. Is that a subtle enough hint? Some of you have already taken this class or a similar class. If that's the case and we've got a record of it, Darren and Brian have your name and you can opt out if you will. But everybody else, the incident command system is a standardized, on-scene, all-hazard incident management concept. So in other words, rather than having certain personnel ask for 14 widgets while certain personnel on the other end of the scene are asking for 28, we just get 14 and we can call it a day. Our objectives, you've heard them all already. Number 1 is life safety. Yours and the citizens. The benefits, we meld public works, police, public health, fire into a common operating picture with our elected and appointed officials. That's how tough it is. So if I say I need a police car, everybody pretty much knows what I'm talking about. If I say I need a 1026, what the heck's a 1026? So it uses common terminology to make for efficient, clear communications. I just did an example of that, unless you know what a 1026 is. Interoperability. Definition, communications, equipment, procedures, and systems can operate together. You folks are on the Armor system now for your radios. Police and police and fire, sorry about that, are on the armor system. We can talk to one another now. It used to be we'd have to hold two portables. But now we can talk to one another as needed. Do I expect the poor guy who's running the paving machine to necessarily have to relay anything to incident command? No, he or she can go through their directors and on up. Modular organization, think of it as a toolbox. You're going to hear command, finance, logistics, operations, planning, and safety. The incident commander, whoever it is, only takes those tools out of the toolbox that he or she needs. Everything else stays in, and it's their responsibility. So it's top down, only the functions that are needed are filled, and each element has somebody in charge. Management by objectives. Anybody recognize that particular street? Might be Baker Road, just south of Excelsior Boulevard, when a car came along and decided to take out 3 poles. Why? I don't know. But did that involve PW for traffic management? Actually, that one didn't. We just kept a couple CSOs. But could it very easily have been a request for dump truck barricade, etc.? Absolutely. Incident action plans. I thought you'd appreciate the EAB incident action plan. The city generates one of these for every significant event. Summerfest, open house, have IAPs generated. Are these going to tell you where to put the generators? No. But it's a guide for the city leadership as far as who's in charge of what. So I think it'd be a great idea to have additional lights next to the Freezy Pops, we know who to go to. The ICS organization, no correlation from their administrative title to what they are doing on the scene. So in other words, someone who serves as a chief or a director every day might not hold that role. They might be, okay, I'll pick on Brian. He's a department head. He would probably be in the EOC. He might be the operations section chief. So he might be taking care of where the boots are actually on the ground and all the materials and resources that are needed with that. Chain of command, just like you do every day. You report to a supervisor. That supervisor, he or she runs the information up and makes the decisions as within their scope. If somebody comes up, a tree branch fell on my car and it was a public tree, and I want an accident report, and I want to know who I call for to get your insurance to pay for it. Is that necessarily the guy who mows the lawn's job? How about run that up? Unity of command. Both Brian and Eric touched on this. This usually starts on the hood of a squad car. And yes, they get rather warm during the summer. Police will have their objectives, give any incident. Police will have their objectives, Public Works will have their objectives, fire will have their objectives. Do you necessarily care that we need to establish a perimeter for 48 hours around whatever incident? No, police do. That goes through their chain to their troops. You're more interested in how many skid steers, notice I didn't use the term bobcat, skid steers, dump trucks, cones, barricades, we're going to need to support that operation, and that'll come down through your chain. But it is the leaders from all the groups getting together, making sure we're all seeing the same picture. So unified command allows incident commanders to make joint decisions by establishing a single structure. To the person who drives the dump truck, it won't be that much different. You might be reporting to Mark Ray from Crystal, but it won't be that much different. Because you're still reporting to a manager, a branch director, whatever the case may be. What it helps is, I'm Johnny Cupcake Officer, and I'm telling you to move your effing truck because I want to move my car someplace. Some of those you can handle on scene without a big deal. But if it's anything significant, guess what? It goes up the chain because there might be a reason we put your dump truck there and don't want the squad car there. The officer might not know that. So that's why it's important to get it going up. If you worked for Uncle Sugar, that would be the armed services for most people. Same principle applies. Span of control. Basic supervision. The number of people you can effectively manage, regardless of what supervisory level you're at. Because the last thing you'd want is 18 people coming at you, each with 18 different needs. How about if we keep it down to about 5 per person? That pretty manageable? That's what span of control is. Oh, sorry, 3 to 7, optimal is 5. Delegation of authority, I may be the first one there. Bridge collapse, I may be the first one there. Do I know what our loader can lift to help get debris out of the way? No. I would shift the incident command responsibilities over to somebody who does. Light rail is coming through. Question is which year? Light rail is coming through. We're already looking at the light rail cars. How do we get people out from under them? Where are the lift points? What do we do if? And right now it's between Public Works and MATS as far as who is responding with the heavier lift equipment. Upon arrival at an incident, a higher ranking person may assume command, maintain it, or transfer to a third party. If Brian pulls up to the light rail derailment and we've got 2 dump trucks plus the wheeled loader on its way, and he sees everything is going fine, I'll just take care of my troops when they show up. But if he sees that it looks like it's getting a little chaotic, he might want to work with the incident commander. Have you thought about the power? Public relations, other trains, especially on our 2 freight lines. Notice 2 more reds. Command staff and general staff. Commands, again, if the incident commander doesn't pawn this off, incident commander is responsible for it. The command staff we'll get into in a little bit. PIO, liaison safety, and then the general staff are where the work gets done. So think of the command staff as simply liaisons, oratories, or whatever the case may be. Command staff is where the stuff is hitting the road. That guy look familiar? Sorry, best picture I could find. Incident commander responsible for all activities and functions until delegated. Don't let that fool you. He or she still maintains responsibility, but they've delegated the authority to get the job done. Directs orders or control by virtue of explicit statutory, regulatory, or delegated authority. They're the ones that they are the one that everybody answers to. So it's no different than your day-to-day job. Who's your IC on a day-to-day level? The overall responsibility. Same thing. Might have a deputy or an assistant, if you will. When you are an IC, I guarantee you will be getting hammered by every Tom, Dick, and Harry with every mundane request imaginable, and sometimes you just got to go talk to somebody else about it. I've got to deal with this. So that's where the deputy comes in. Deputy positions can be put in at the incident command, branch, and section levels. So the general staff will have branch directors under them. It might be by grid, it might be by quadrant, it might be dividing it, might be by scope of what they do. Tree removal, road opening, however we divide it up. And then the section levels underneath. Transfer, again, moves it from one commander to another. This will be a perfect one where Public Works and us are backing out, and now it's time for Bay West or the resource to take care of that small diesel spill on 101. let them take care of it. So we covered that. ICS Form 201, all this thing is it's just a scratch sheet. Here's how big I think the incident is. Here's where I've got an org chart with Post-its is usually what I end up doing. Okay, I've got this, Darren's taking care of it. But it keeps, anybody can walk in and go, oh, I see what's going on. Okay. Again, command staff, referred to as officers, not police officers. Officers, public information officer, what's that? We need to get information out to the elected and appointed and to the public. Nothing better than having somebody go, excuse me, do you think the city's doing great? Oh, it sucks. Oh, I think the city's doing great. Nothing better than having that crap on the TV news. Public information. Liaison. There will be county, and if it's significant enough, there will be county, state, and possibly federal assets coming in. They need somebody to report to get an assignment and to find out what's going on. Liaison. Safety. Just that simple. Chainsaw operations. Do you or do you not need a healthy amount of equipment to operate a chainsaw? Chaps, ear, eye protection, training. Yeah, that's safety officer's bailiwick. Okay? Public information again. Information dissemination and media relations. Because there might be something you come across that we don't want necessarily released in an uncontrolled environment. Oh, this is going great. Or, oh, we might not want the, oh, it sucks out right now, because what's that going to do to the public? They are taking, so we need to manage that a little bit. Not lie, but just manage it. Safety officer, again, pretty much the title says it all. And yes, I did get a picture of Brian smiling. So that there was worth the price of admission. Liaison, point of contact for assisting and cooperating agencies. How about if it's a private business that's impacted, like some of our 302 sites around town? We would need to work with them as well, because they know what's in their building. They know how it reacts. We might not necessarily know. General staff. Ops, bottom line, boots on the ground, and anything that goes with it. Tactics to carry out the incident objectives. Provide for civilian and responder safety. Let's get the streets opened up in the southwest corner of town, southwest being delegated at that point in time. And let's coordinate with Excel to start stringing power back into. Those would be 3 objectives. Ops section chief is overall in charge of that. So they direct and coordinate, typically one of the first to be assigned, has the most incident resources, may divide it by geographics, by groups, as far as functional areas, like I said, and then of course branches underneath either the divisions or groups. Division, just like it says, dividing it geographically. Might need to remember that because it's a different font. Groups, again, there's health and safety in the public works group. When might we have health and safety? How about a disease issue? We have a mass dispensing site, actually we have 2 of them, in this community for giving prophylaxis to the public. We also have 1 for giving it to city employees. Might we need cones and traffic management at those things? Count on it. So there's a possibility of operations dividing it, and then underneath water and sanitary and electrical. Just that'll be fluid based on the event. Branches are managed by a branch director. Again, remember the red stuff. Task forces. Combination of mixed resources with a common operating picture under the direction of a leader. Don't confuse that with a strike team, which is a group of all the same resource. Okay? So task force is different, strike team is the same. Or if you want to do it this way, this is a strike team, task force is the other one. Single resources, skid steer, wheel loader, dump truck, chipper. Staging areas. We've asked for a bunch of stuff from Valley, Park, and Hopkins, public works stuff. Rather than have them all roll into public works going, okay, what do you want now? How about if we put them someplace until we know where we want them? Call it staging. If you've ever watched one of our fire scenes, you'll watch the first 3 rigs get in right away, and then the rest park about a block away for a minute. They're in staging until they're given direction. And the use of titles help provides a common operating picture for all of us. Plans, she, in this case, compiles the incident action plan, the one I already showed you. Typically that's generated out of us, not Julie, but it's the same principle. Compiles the incident action plan, that comes out of the planning section chief, there's your thing to remember. Logs. Sorry, I couldn't find a better picture. My apologies. Bottom line, we need the left-handed spanner wrenches. Guess who you go to get left-handed spanner wrenches on order? Logistics, just like the military. The toys. Finance and admin tracks personnel and equipment time. Why do we track equipment time? That's reimbursable if it's declared. Not only your time, but the time of the equipment. And that goes into the type of equipment it is. Operational period briefing. You guys are coming in. During the initial response, you won't see this. It'll just be a quick, we've been hit bad, I need you to take 3 people to the north end of town by Ridgedale, and that'll be your operational briefing. When we start getting into operational periods, which are usually 12 hours long, that's when we'll start doing this stuff. And it will be fire, police, law enforcement, military, whoever all else, one room, same time, same briefing, so everybody knows what's going on. Work process. This is pretty simple, but you see a lot of red. When arriving, you check in, find out what your assignment is. Excuse me. The check-in, initial briefing, and record keeping and demob are all needed to assure accountability. If you show up at 6 a.m., I want to know you're leaving at 6 p.m. and that you've left at 6 p.m. Because if you haven't checked out by 6 p.m., we need to find out what happened. Where is it? Where are you? Implementing tactical objectives to achieve the incident objectives. I just covered this. Feedback is a two-way street. Take out the tree that's blocking Windsor Lake Road. The tree is a 36-inch diameter. I've got a 12-inch chainsaw. Guess what? I need something different. Unless you're going to go crazy, I need something different. Before leaving, complete all the tasks, update your supervisor, and probably a debrief. Some of this stuff will be a little spooky, especially if it's one where you're helping with the rescue operations. You might see things that people aren't normally designed to see. Limbs, and I'm not talking tree, things like that. Incident facilities, we call them from the hip. The backup emergency operations center is actually the Public Works lunchroom. In any event of significance, is that going to be a busy place? Yeah. So we'd partition, use part of it, the rest would be yours. Incident command post, just like it says. This starts out on the hood of a squad car. and then as it escalates, it gets into facilities. But that's where it starts out. So they do kinds and typing. That's FEMA stuff. You heard Eric mention Dan mentioned type 2 dump trucks. That is all categorized by weight and by capacity. So we get the right resources again by typing. We covered the incident complexity. Eric put up that very busy slide. Same thing. That's my end of it.
You mentioned handouts at the beginning. There was one step in the back there toward the end. Is this PowerPoint in a handout?
It's not in the handout, but the director and his immediate staff have it. I gave you 2 pieces of paper. One is the test itself. Take 5 minutes today, go through those questions, get the answers lined up. Then when you log on to take the test, all you have to do is look at what you've already done, transfer it to the computer. That's all you have to do. The questions might not be in the same order, but I'm asking you to do it now, sooner rather than later, while the information is still fresh in your mind. And then the other one, the copy of the ICS from FEMA, I only copied the definitions part. The whole document is like 220 some odd pages. I don't want you guys walking out of here. No. But if you're stuck, most of it is simply definitions. And all you'd have to do is look up the definition and go back. Okay? So we tried to make it as easy as possible for you guys to get it done. And like I said, the icons will be on the computers through the end of the month. I would do them sooner rather than later, just while the information is still fresh. Next session, we'll go deeper into it. Okay? Fair enough? Any other questions?
Need more handouts.
I'm hearing
This is the only one that was.
they have the whole thing. So they have the whole thing. Yep. Who's up?
I mentioned in 1998, we went down and helped St. Peter. Now, I don't know how many of you folks were here. Rick, were you here for that? Did you go down?
I didn't go down.
Okay. Anybody else go down? Tim? I think what we learned out of that situation is that Minnetonka was a desired community to come down because we came prepared. We came to take care of ourselves. We weren't reliant on anybody else, so we sent down, the equipment, the personnel, mechanics, and we were pretty much self-sufficient. And if something came up, we took care of ourselves. And I got feedback back from St. Peter that said that they really appreciated that because you reported in, got your orders, and they didn't worry about you. You were able to take care of yourself. I think we were there approximately 2 weeks. Yep. Were you there, Kevin? What were some of the things that caught your attention when you were down there?
Just the devastation waste.
Yep.
Yeah, not being prepared for what we were seeing.
Yep.
The first day was the most interesting. They kept us in one neighborhood for the whole 2 weeks we were down there, and so we watched it through the changes in different stages and how they were coordinating and getting rid of everything.
Yeah. Really went pretty well.
It went good.
Kevin or Tim, any observations that you had?
Not really. I mean, we really overloaded the trucks and everything.
Yeah. I remember the one thing that the mechanics kept coming back and saying, we had so many flat tires. We had a lot of flat tires, which There's nothing you can do about that. So we took down, after that, we took down a number of spare tires so that, you know, knowing full well that we're going to have flats, we might as well have them with us. So, other lessons, you know, we've had, a couple of years ago, we had some flooding. One of the things we try to do on the management side is to ask to make sure that, you know, things are ready. Do we have at least a start of supply of sandbags? Are the pumps ready to go? Are the generators ready to go? And, you know, we kind of ask ourselves prior to that particular season. So, you know, after we get done snow plowing, we're asking ourselves, are the pumps ready to go? Do we still have some sandbags for the spring potential flooding? Light plants, are they ready to go? So, if you think of things, and certainly everybody can't think of everything, but if you think of things, make sure you let somebody know so that we can get it ready, because it's better to have it ready than having to chase your tail and get it ready. Any observations that anybody else has had with regard to emergencies that you've been involved with?
Just, I remember, when you were talking about, the feedback was the communication was a big problem down there.
Yep.
I think that's the way it is in most of these situations, if they can get good communication.
You know, and that's something that you never know ahead of time. You know, we always plan on pretty much landlines going down. Cell phones, you'll probably find out that in the heat of the battle, service will be sporadic. The good news since 1998 is that we're on an Armor radio system. We should be able to talk to each other. You never know. But communications is a big deal. And once communications breaks down, it becomes very difficult to start doing your work. So, I don't even remember. Do you remember, Tim?
We had, we had a couple Bobcats, a loader, tandems went down.
I think we had 6 plus, chipper truck.
That went down with us the first day, and we brought it back and parked it. We went down with the boot truck and the chipper the first day, and then we went back with the big stuff.
Yeah.
The Bobcats and loaders.
And however much, you know, we had to kind of maintain services here in town because, you know, that's the reason why we're here, but we were willing to give up as much as we could to help those folks out. And I know there was a convoy kind of every morning because people came back every night, convoy every morning of people coming back, not only from just Minnetonka, but other metro cities.
Yeah, we, did every other day with the crews, and I think we left the equipment down there overnight. We did the manuals or something.
So, you know, that's one situation that we've been involved with. Turned out fairly well. The devastation is unbelievable. As some of the other folks mentioned, one of the things I think about is if we get a lot of debris and a lot of damage, you know, where are we going to put it? You know, certainly we have parks around, but some of our parks aren't very big. But the one thing that all you guys got to keep in the back of your mind is on Trunk Highway 7 and Baker Road, in the southeast corner, there's that fairly large landmass on the interchange. Remember that that belongs to the city. We bought that. And that will take us a long ways to put debris in. The reason why we bought it when we were trying to site a water tower, which eventually was the Williston Water Tower, we thought that maybe that would be a good location. And it was. Except that when we got into the calculations of really where the water needed to be, it needed to be on the west side of 494. So, but I think at some point in time, if and when there is a a debris problem. Keep that in the back of your mind that that's someplace that we could go. Now just don't go there. You know, you're going to have to converse with somebody to make sure that that it's okay. Likely what we would have to do is to throw in a culvert along Baker Road so that we had access right into the property, you know, and throw in some loads of conbit or whatever dirt so that we can get in there easily. So keep that in the back of your mind. Flooding, you know, we've got the creeks in town. We try to keep at least a couple pallets of sandbags so that we can start the operation, and then we can fairly quickly start filling sandbags. Realize that sandbags, if they're sitting out into the sun, they don't last very long. You know, the plastic deteriorates and they pretty much give up. So we try to keep a couple pallets in the reduction center, and if you see the bags giving out, let somebody know so we can refill them and get a couple more pallets in there. Any other observations that people might have? What we're trying to do here is just share information of what experiences we've had so that you don't have to be surprised, I guess. Like I said, a number of you folks are firefighters and so forth, so you're into it deeper than I am. So I do know that when it does come, there's a lot of people in the city that are going to be relying on us, you know, to get it done, and we'll get it done. But the whole goal is not to have to re-educate each other on how we're going to get it done. We'll get it done. So if there isn't any other questions, then we'll toss it back to Jim, and he'll talk a little bit about the Armor radio system. Yep.
What if there's flooding or something like that, or major trees down where we just can't even get to public works?
Yeah. Then we'll have to figure out another place to congregate at. I know the one thing that I am concerned about, because if the city, for whatever reason, or pieces of the city get cordoned off, try to keep your IDs with you, because it may be the only way you can get in past the cordoned off areas. If communications don't work, yeah, we can verify that you work for the city, but if communications are tough, we might not get there right away. So we'll have to play, as these folks have said, each situation is different. We'll have to play it by ear. What we're used to likely won't work, so be flexible. Be flexible.
I'll back up on Brian's information. All right, I won't try humor with you guys anymore. Now you're screwed. To back up on what Brian said, the great big book of everything, if you will, the binder sitting on the end there, is the city's emergency plan. About 2/3 of it is resource materials. So who'd we call to get, do we call United Rentals for additional loaders? Things like that. Where do we get sandbags? Where do we get sand? Things like that. The other third of it basically breaks the city down by department. What does each department have to worry about? And this is from admin down to PW. What do you have to worry about? The reason for that is this way we don't get Julie trying to ask for a front loader it segregates it out. Excuse me. But like Brian also alluded to, some of this is going to be calling audible at the line. Okay, we don't have a a state of emergency yet signed by Mayor Wiersum, but we need this now. So we might go get the emergency declaration, and just be advised. Your armor fleet map. lovely little document that details everybody you can talk to on those wonderful little portables. You can practically call Mars. Not that you'd want to, but you can practically call Mars. The big changes from the last go around, we added an Ops 3, which is actually kind of significant now. With police and fire on Armour, whenever we did a joint response with another community or communities, Hennepin Dispatch would say go to H-Fire 3, go to LTAC 3. They would assign a separate talk group for us off of the main that incident would be on. They still do that. But the same thing didn't exist for Public Works. So now if you're going to Crystal to help Mark Ray out, where do you go? Okay, typically we have a little more time getting you guys on the road, so we can usually figure it out. But for folks coming in, they're going to Ops 3. Your Ops 3. You may stay on your own talk group that you do use day to day, but your mutual aid partners will probably be on that one. Again, we can still call audibles, but that is just to make it simpler, and I hate to say it, but modeling after the police and fire way of doing it gets a little confusion out. Well, I work for Plymouth. We don't have Ops 3 in our trucks. We can patch. Okay? So don't get too excited about that. The other big change is in your A zone on 15 is H911. What in the heck, note the H, is 911? That is the same thing as calling 911 from your cell phone. That is straight to Hennepin Sheriff's Dispatch, should you need it. Should you choose to use your mobile device, so be it. But that is straight to Hennepin Sheriff's as well. That one is monitored. So a dispatcher will reply to you, what's your emergency, where, when, and resources will get started through their dispatch center. The other piece of the puzzle is that the police and fire mains that were in Zone E don't exist anymore. That was when we had our own dispatch. Those two are now blank because both police and fire are dispatched by Hennepin County now. And rather than, I know there's a couple scanner hounds in here who could probably handle listening to that stuff while still listening to their respective Public Works talk groups. We just chose to leave them out, at least for the time being. Because there's no real reason, subjectively, no real reason why you would necessarily need to be on the Hennepin Police main. But by the same token, you would want to be on the Ops main, Public Works, Ops main, things like that. To show you how thought out that part is, fire cannot transmit on the law enforcement main. Law enforcement cannot transmit on the fire main. That's what their own mains are for. But again, when we get to a scene, we might be on H-Fire 3, Southwest Fireground 3. If it gets big enough, that's what those ME tacs are for. Again, dispatch will patch. All you have to figure out is how to get to Zone C in whatever particular bank. And then that will be your operation. There isn't really a lot of need necessarily for the poor guy or gal running the skid steer to be on an ME tac. They might just stay on whatever parks or ops or whatever that they usually do. But your director, your manager coming along with might need to go to that ME tac to find out what's going on. And actually on most larger incidents, police go to their own tactical channel, fire goes to their own tactical channel, just so we can keep the stuff separate. The last hazardous materials incident at Minnetonka High School, and yes, we have those all the time. That's what we had to do because police were so busy trying to coordinate getting the students out of the building, and we were trying to get into the building to find out what exactly they had done, that the cross chatter was just too much. We had to split them out. And that was a relatively minor incident in the science lab. Okay? Any questions on this? I know you guys have taken a lot of training on it. I know my esteemed colleague in the police department has done a lot of work with you folks on this as well. Any questions?
Why don't you go to hot wash, family considerations, emotional. Make that time with
Okay. We're going to go out of sequence here. So for those of you that love black and white, sorry, that's the way it goes. Hot washes. Every incident that you go to, regardless how benign or how complex, is going to have lessons learned. Gee, if we would have done, we could have, get it to the people who need to know. If we would have used 26N98 instead of 2697, that would have been, get it to the people who know. That's how we improve ourselves for next time. Having a few more spare tires on hand would have been a really great idea on whatever all else we had, the blizzard that caused some issues with the trucks. If we had some more of those, get that stuff up the chain to the people who know. Because if we don't hear back, we assume everything went fine. It's that behind the truck talk, if you will. You need to get up so that we can take advantage of it. Every hot wash, everyone, and yes, you're not supposed to say never and not supposed to say always. Always starts out with communications. This was wrong with communications, that was wrong with communications, I didn't understand this. It all boils back to communications. Guaranteed. The armor system didn't work. Well, that would take a lot, but it's possible. Our cell phones didn't work. 35W bridge collapsed for security issues. They took down the cell phone towers. If we have our cell phone towers wiped out by a wind event, it's going to take a little bit to get cows. Cellular on wheels. Towers in. Don't get me wrong. Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, all the rest of it will bust their humps to get the equipment up here and operational. Why? That's their money that they're losing because you can't talk. The one frame in my last presentation where it showed the skid loader with the two Hummers, that was in southwestern Minnesota. And with the city cell phone, I actually had to drive up out of that town that was in the river valley up onto the ridge in order to get a signal. My private cell phone, I could talk from in town. So just, adapt. Be ready. As far as disaster responses, I touched on this last time I was up briefly. And that is, each one of us is different. Each one of us has different emotional triggers. Each one of us has different emotional thresholds. What might drive certain people absolutely crazy, others might not care. That's simply the way of humanity. We're all different. But when you're standing on a road scene in, let's say, possibly westbound Highway 7, just east of just east of 101, and you're talking to the medical examiner, that should tell you what sort of scene it was, and she goes, I need a line search done for parts. Okay, I know what a line search is. Let's set it up. She goes, we can start by your left foot. There was a piece of kidney. Should that have been on the roadway or should that have been inside a body someplace? That's the type of stuff you might end up seeing. We will do our best. Hands down, we will do our best to make sure that you're properly briefed going in, and that part of debriefing includes defusing. So that if you do see the kidney beside your boot, it doesn't cause permanent problems. PTSD is not a military-only thing. Granted, they've got more of it and for good reason, but it's not a military-only thing. Look at your local police and firefighters, as well as your EMS providers. Are they wired right? Not even close. Look at me. Am I wired right? You be quiet. Am I wired right? No. But it's a compensatory, big word, compensation mechanism because of some of the stuff we see. You can't just bury the stuff. You have to talk it out. Another example I use is I've probably done CPR 250 times, 300. I couldn't tell you what the older people looked like. I can tell you in detail what the 3 infants looked like. So, everybody sees it, will be affected in some way. You might live in, what's the community I haven't picked? Otsego. That's the sign that says beer on 169 North. You might live in Otsego that might be completely untouched. But you come into work and you see pieces of the town that you work in obliterated. You're naturally going to transpose that memory from Minnetonka to Otsego. What would happen if? What if? What if? What if? It's natural, you're going to do it. It's normal to feel anxious about your own safety and that of your family. Take some steps up front, and we'll get into that in the next frame. Take some steps up front. Because like Brian said when we started this, if your house is taking a hit as well as the city, get out of here. I don't want you. Because your mind is going to be on your house, your family. I need you focused on the mission. Okay? Which for the fire service in this community is really tricky because most of our people live in town. So now how do we keep them separated? Profound sadness, grief, anger are normal reactions. If it's a significant enough event, I mentioned the term defusing. It means as part of your coming out and going home, you will not only get water, food, rest, but you will be talking to somebody. How much you open up, how much you don't open up is up to you. But these are professional crisis counselors that will be coming in going, okay, you just saw some crap that you hadn't even thought of before. Let's talk to get an initial assessment, a rapid assessment on how you're doing and should you be coming back for the next operational period. Acknowledging your feelings helps you recover. I used to not be able to get the 3 infant CPRs out without welling up to the point that I couldn't continue. Now it's kind of, okay, it's what happened, it was out of my hands, but it is what it is. Focus on your own strengths. When you're really stressed, I mean your significant other has absolutely driven, significant other and or children, have absolutely driven you up the wall. You are ready to wonder if the jail time is actually worth it. Things like that. What is your vent? Baseball, trap shooting, running, biking, rowing. What is your vent? Taking baths. What is your vent? Use that vent. Don't bottle it up. Accept help from community programs and resources. Suicide in emergency services has reached an all-time high, and the awareness is coming with it. It's not just a military thing anymore. Again, military has much more of it. Please don't take it any other way. But now the emergency services are catching up going, oh, wait a minute. There was a medic just last week in Ontario who went to the mosque shooting up there in January. She took her own life last month. She put on her Class A uniform and took herself out. Was she in serious trouble? Yes. What did her coworkers say she would always reply with? How you doing? You went to that, what was her usual reply? I'm fine. That's why we bring the professionals in who will take your "that's fine" and go, "That's nice, that's bull. Let's talk." Everyone has different needs, different ways of coping. Like I said, biking, baths, whatever the case may be. It's common to want to strike back at people. I'm going to yell at you because the chainsaw you were operating malfunctioned. Chain jumped the track. Easy for me to say. It might be natural for you to snap back. That's part of the incident. Don't go to physical violence, but that might be part of the incident weighing on you didn't even realize. Good idea to make sure you have updated your family disaster plan and disaster supplies. We'll get into that in the next frame. Next frame after this. Children and older adults are a special concern because they might have it through secondhand exposure. So your child is at school, daycare, and they've got the coverage of Minnetonka trying to recover from, and they know mom or dad works there. And is the media going to show good stuff, or is the media going to try and show the other? They're going to try and show the other. Look, they're falling on their faces. No, we're not. It's part of the plan. But if they can spin it, contact local. We will give you resources. Sand Creek. We will also provide for it before you leave the scene. Because again, we need you back up here as well as up here. FEMA Assault may provide counseling, etc. See counseling, there's the big ones. A little bit of altered sleep pattern isn't that big a deal. It keeps going on. You start having vivid flashbacks. Worst injury I ever got, the only real dream I had, was a one-frame dream overnight that simply had the rig that was involved. That was it. That was it for the difficulty sleeping. For the visions. Difficulty sleeping went on for about 3 weeks. Low threshold of frustration. Again, the chain skipped. Go ballistic. Don't increase your use of drugs or alcohol. That is not a healthy compensatory mechanism. Use the healthy ones. Limited attention span. Okay, I've got that 24/7. I don't need an event to do that for me. So. Poor work performance, stomach problems, head problems, tunnel vision. All of a sudden, all the people you deal with sound like those grown-ups on Charlie Brown. Those are signs of something going on. Cold or flu-like symptoms, depending upon when the event happens, it might actually be a cold or a flu. But it might be the body saying something too. Disorientation or confusion, going back to limited attention span. Concentration, reluctance to leave home, primarily on kids, especially if it's in your community. Well, yeah, I've got to go to school today, but my stomach's not feeling real good. Is it genuine or is it compensation? Feelings of hopelessness. If you walk up and your community is now obliterated, see Joplin, see Birmingham, do you initially get a feeling of hopelessness? We're never going to get back from this. We don't take on the whole elephant. We take on pieces of the elephant. Mood swings, easy bouts of crying. I don't care which gender you are, assuming you affiliate with a gender. I don't care which gender you are. Crying is not a crime. It is a healthy vent, and it has to be treated that way. Guilt or self-doubt. If I would have done the compressions harder, faster, better position, would that have made a difference? Scientifically, I can show no. Is that going to convince my brain? No. You still could have done it harder, faster, blah, blah, blah. And fear of being alone or of strangers. Okay, you're supposed to teach your children a healthy respect of strangers, who they should go to for help, who they shouldn't, maybe even as far as a code word for family, friends, that sort of thing. Okay, if John comes to pick you up, he has to say sassafras, or it is baloney. Your kids will remember that. And if John can't remember sassafras, refresher course before he goes to pick the child up. Mutual aid, we hit on this one, Eric did. Surrounding communities, all disciplines. Fire, police, PW, public health, administration. If Minnetonka says we need help, guess what? It's going to be y'all come. But it has to be organized. See ICS, see staging. The Minnesota Municipal, easy for me to say, Minnesota Municipal Utilities Association or equivalents. FAST and IMT, those are state assets that are run by individual departments. The FAST is the fire chief's assistants. LAST is the fire chief's funeral team. The incident management team, remember when Eric put the slide up, there's type 5 to type 1? Minnesota has a type 3 team in-house, headquartered out of Bloomington. If we get clocked really bad, one of the first calls I'm making is to Yulee. I need the type 3. What's going to happen? About 25 people from different jurisdictions that were unimpacted will be on our doorstep. And they will help develop the IAP and help us get organized. Which leaves Brian and Darren. They can break off and do other stuff while somebody else is managing. Hennepin County Emergency Management, Hennepin County Public Works, other county. Who do we share a 9-block border with? Carver County on town line. They've already said, you need us, give us a call, we don't care. We'll come up. State Statutes, Article 12, Eric already went over that. How about HOSM, Homeland Security Emergency Management and Minnesota Department of Transportation? Could they be in here? What if it's Highway 7? What if it's 494, 394 that are impacted? Do they now have a seat at the table? Yep. And EMAC, the poop really hits the fan like Eric did his Florida trips, Florida, Alabama, etc. trips. Interstate mutual aid. Florida can call Minnesota and go, we need 1,400 gimbal bearings. Minnesota can go, we got 1,400 gimbal bearings, just get us the aircraft to get them down there. So this mutual aid thing goes a lot larger than just community to community, state to state. And in certain areas, I won't mention northern border, it goes into Canada. So Roseau can ask for help from across the border and they'll get it. Any questions on that particular piece? Hearing none. The other piece I was going to hit on, in addition to emotional response, I mentioned before, have a family plan, have a family kit. It will make your job much easier and much less stressful. Have a few gallons of water, some non-perishable food, things like that. Someplace in your house. My son likes to refer to our pantry as the warehouse because, we've got a bunch of that. But by the same token, when I leave for the call, do I have to worry about him having food or water? He knows where they're at. Does he know where the camping equipment is if we don't have power or gas? Does he know how to use it? Yes. Do you have a trusted neighbor or a spouse, significant other, that will probably be at home with them that could help out? How about a family communications plan? You're at work. and the city of Minnetonka gets hit by a insert whatever here. How do you communicate to the significant other or children? To let them know I'm doing all right, I'm working. Anybody in here seen the rhetorical question? Anybody in here seen the movie Sully? What was the first thing Sully did once he got on board the water taxi after landing the plane in the North River? Pulled out his phone. I'm all right. Turn on the TV, but I'm good. That's all it has to be. Is your family then going to be less stressed about it? Are you going to be less stressed? Yes, that's going to bring it down. Maybe not a lot, but that's going to bring it down. If it is something like a hurricane making landfall, okay, we usually get rain showers out of hurricanes. But what about the other events we face? Winter weather, summer weather, technological. There was just a blast put out this morning about a new cyber attack. How about earthquakes? As Mr. Bovitz will attest to, Minnesota is seismically active. It's a very small area up by Alexandria, and can the USGS tell us why? No. What about landslides? What is it, Wabasha Street in St. Paul, I think is still closed because of the limestone cliff that collapsed? We've got that stuff. Remember a couple summers ago when that sound barrier just over the border in Eden Prairie on 494 slid onto 494. And they had to figure out how to get the freeway open again. So just be advised. They're out there, they're different, they're unique, but they're all over the place. A little bit of extra food, a little bit of extra water. Don't forget about your fur missiles. Fur family. Whether it's dogs, cats, mongooses, pythons, whatever you guys have. And don't forget about vital medications. If you approach your doctor and say, I've got a prescription for warfarin, which is a significant blood thinner, how soon before the end of your script are you typically allowed to refill? About 7 days, usually 5. Work with your physician. A number of them who understand that you're doing, and the same thing goes for asthma meds, whatever the case, critical to your health and well-being, will typically write out a second prescription for like 5 days. What does that buy you? That buys you an additional 5 days of no pharmacy, no electricity, no cash, that you will still have your medications. So again, water and food are the biggies. Medications. Does it matter if you haven't been able to vacuum for 2 weeks? To some of us, I get it. Yes, it would. But in the overall scheme of things, does it matter? Can you just take care of it when they get the power restored? Citywide blackout. Whose are some of the first assets we should think about getting power to that Excel probably has already identified? How about the Glen? How about Hillcrest? How about North Urgency Center? How about our lift stations? How about our treatment sites? Granted, we take care of those, usually portable generators running around, that sort of thing. Director Wage brought up March 29th, 1998. Yes, I remember the date when St. Peter got clocked. St. Peter originally didn't put out a request for help. Their communication system was wiped out. They couldn't get the word out. Comfrey, who also took a serious hit, was able to say, we're not proud. We need help. The Minnesota National Guard liaison at the time, should I mention SIG by name? Understood what had happened in the weather down there. So he sent the requested resources, military resources, to Comfrey, plus 200 additional ground troops. Guess where the ground troops ended up once the word finally got out? St. Peter. But he was smart enough to go, Comfrey's been hit, who's on the line? Because St. Peter probably can't ask for help, but they're going to need it. First military generator comes into St. Peter. Military liaison is there. Okay, our first one's here. It's a, what was it, 100 kilowatt, whatever size monster it was. Okay, St. Peter, police, fire, public works. We got more on the way, but right now we've got one. Where do I send it? What do you suppose the police response was? Well, we need it for the jail, because you don't want those hooligans out. What about fire? Well, fire station, shore power to the equipment, things like that. Bear in mind the St. Peter fire chief had just cut his way out of his driveway. The 3 trees that were about yay big around that blocked him in, has just cut his way out, and once he finally gets out, the first sirens he hears is from Henderson, coming in self-dispatched to help out. Because St. Peter couldn't even page their own fire department out. Then you have the public works director, who was quietly sitting there enjoying the argument, grabbing some popcorn and watching the banter. Public works director makes one statement. If I don't have power to the lift station, we're going to be up to our ankles in raw sewage in 12 hours. Guess who got the generator? Guess who didn't get an argument on it? And St. Peter was not up to their ankles in raw sewage. But it's all a matter of getting the heads together to figure out a common plan. I've got 7 minutes to break.
We're done. Anybody got any questions? Was it what you expected? Any other areas you'd like to see it covered? All right. Go downstairs to the dining room.